It's a universally well-known fact that Amber Bennett sucks. Even before her unforgivable gaslighting of Mark when he told her he was invincible, there was problematic behavior with her, such as giving him an offended look when he told her he had to run. What, talking to me isn't the most important thing in your life? Giving him an evil look of sociopathic jealousy when she saw them together, and blackmailing a bully into giving Mark her number when she could have just given it to him herself. Debbie Grayson, on the other hand, is the exact opposite of Amber. She's a protective, loving mother who wants her son to have his own identity and make his own decisions. She's suspicious of her husband and takes initiative to find evidence that he did kill the Guardians. She gives Nolan that epic fuck you and tells him to get out of her house when it becomes clear that he didn't have a good reason for killing the Guardians. She isn't afraid to stand up to the shady government agents that would use her family like tools for their own selfish ends. She's Invincible's strongest female character. Except she isn't. Like Amber, she's a spoiled, entitled Karen, and Cecil Stedman is her abuse victim, like Mark was Amber's. Like Amber, there was problematic behavior with Debbie since the beginning, except it's not quite as obvious. In episode 1, the Mueller twins attack the White House, and Debbie's reaction is quite flippant. The White House isn't important. It's rebuilt twice a year. The president doesn't even live there. You do know that it's not just the White House that's in danger, right? Countless people are in danger, like GDA agents, guards, civilians, tourists, and, oh yeah, children. You're not going to think of them. You're just going to make flippant comments about how they rebuild the White House twice a year and complain about not having breakfast together. We get a similar reaction from when Mark comes home from the third Flaxen attack. Mark at first thinks she's crazy for not being concerned that Nolan went into another dimension, but she assures him that she was only so worried because Nolan's never been critically injured before, and for him, dimension hopping is just another Tuesday. Yeah, and it was the last Tuesday for this guy and countless other people. But she's the wife of the most powerful man on the planet. He's always going to come home. So why should she spare any of these schmucks a thought? Just smile and shrug your shoulders and flippantly assure your son that your family will be okay. Maybe if this happened just these 2 times, I would forgive it. After all, attacks like this happen all the time in Invincible, and some desensitization would be expected. More importantly, Debbie actively encourages Mark to help people, even if it means missing school or even if they're not being completely honest. Just because she doesn't think of the victims all the time doesn't mean she doesn't care. So why bother mentioning these 2 incidents at all? Because Debbie's flippancy is something that's going to grow into full-blown callousness later. In episode 4, Nolan patronizes Debbie by telling her she's the wife of the most powerful man on the planet and shouldn't have to worry about work stuff. She's rightfully pissed at him, but the worst part is that Nolan has a point. Being Nolan's wife and Mark's mother grants Debbie privileges a lot of people can only dream of in the Invincible world. If she or Mark are ever in danger, they would be the first priority for the most powerful man on the planet. Also, it's safe to assume that the neighborhood they live in has never been the target for a major villain attack, so she lives in a sheltered bubble, and it really shows. Also, if she, Mark, or Nolan ever got hurt, they'd have immediate access to the best medical facilities on the planet with no waiting list. Debbie has clearly grown very used to her privileges and takes them for granted. In episode 2, she and Mark are taken to the GDA to see the critically injured Nolan, and Debbie is clearly not happy to be there. She's angry, her arms are folded and her eyes dart suspiciously left and right. She neither likes nor trusts the GDA. And hey, she's probably right not to. After all, in almost every fictional story, government agents are just shady bureaucrats who serve a hypocritical greater good mentality while people like Debbie and her family are just expendable pawns in the twisted games they play, right? Unlike his mother, Mark is new to this and shows interest in GDA tech. Donald cheerfully attempts to explain about the GDA's threat response teams, but Debbie snaps that they're not in the mood for a tour. Okay, that's understandable. Her husband and the father of her child could be dying right now, so this is a tagless time to show off your toys, Donald. Yeah, Mark expressed an interest, but Mark's a kid, and Donald should have been a bit more considerate. Mark and Debbie express concern over Nolan, and then Cecil emerges. He introduces himself to Mark, swears that they'll find whoever attacked the Guardians and punish them, and gives Debbie an apology. Debbie gets up, crosses her arms, and tells Cecil that he has a lot of nerve. For what? What exactly has Cecil done? Nothing. If he had waited a week to tell Debbie and Mark about Nolan's injuries, I would be on Debbie's side. But he didn't. He contacted them the next day. So what exactly has he done that justifies Debbie chewing him out for having a lot of nerve? Intending to stay by her husband's side, Debbie demands cold towels, ice water, and a cot. Cecil tries to interject that that isn't necessary since Nolan is under the care of the best trained surgeons in the world. Oh, yeah, the cold clinical touch of a surgeon is all that's needed when you're in the hospital. Having someone you love by your side? Who needs that? Okay, now he's being a douchebag. Debbie rightfully tells him off and makes it clear that she's not leaving. To Cecil's credit, he does abide by her requests. Unfortunately, the douchebaggeriness between these two is going to get very one sided soon. It starts at the end of episode 4, where Nolan believes he successfully framed Damien Darkblood for murdering the Guardians. He tells Debbie that Cecil called to apologize, to which Debbie replies that Cecil never apologizes. Which is a lie because the first thing he said to Debbie when she and Mark visited Nolan in the hospital in episode 2 was an apology. In episode 6, Debbie, with Art's help, discovers Nolan's lies and crimes. She calls Nolan out on his gaslighting and delivers the epic fuck you before marching up to bed. The next morning, she gives Nolan one last chance to explain himself, and when he responds with more evasion, she yells at him to get out of her house and tries to contact Mark, only for Mark to not respond and several GDA soldiers to decloak themselves with their guns raised at a departing Nolan. Donald takes Debbie to Cecil, who reveals he knew all along Nolan killed the Guardians. Debbie then proceeds to slap him, which Cecil takes without complaint and demands why he didn't tell her. Now, I wanted to give Debbie a pass on this because, after all, she's emotionally compromised, and Cecil sent the murderous Nolan home, leaving Debbie and Mark in blissful ignorance. I would give her a pass if Debbie expressed any care that Nolan is a psychotic murderer. She seems to at face value, but she really doesn't. Cecil sends soldiers to try and kill Nolan in his own home. Nolan brutally slaughters them all, then goes to the safe house. He sneers at Donald for being pathetic, then goes out of his way to torture and humiliate him by crushing his spine until Donald is forced to detonate the safe house, killing himself and hoping to take Nolan with him. Keep in mind, Debbie saw all this because she was in the same monitoring room as Cecil.
Jesus Christ. The honor was all mine.
Oh, no. Oh, God. Nolan. You monster.
Let me emphasize that. Debbie knows Nolan killed the Guardians. She knows he didn't have a good reason. She saw how he brutally slaughtered the GDA agents and how he sadistically tortured Donald. She's seen with her own eyes who Nolan really is, and her response is to express concern only for her psychopath husband and call Cecil a monster. So, is Donald a monster too? He was the one who detonated the safe house after all, while his spine was being crushed. Yeah, emotional compromise won't get you out of this, Debbie. Cecil isn't the monster here. You are. You're also a whore. Nolan can kill expendable GDA agents who are going to protect you with their lives, I might add, and you won't bat an eye. But when Donald sacrifices himself, Cecil can't spare a moment to grieve his closest comrade without this bitch dehumanizing him. Had Debbie merely expressed grief at Nolan's supposed death, that would have been understandable, but she's putting all her hate and blame on Cecil when the majority of it should be on Nolan. Even Mark understood why he needed to be kept in ignorance about his father. Even after his father nearly beat him to death and destroyed Chicago, had Alan warned him, he would have just gone to his father and told him everything. Maybe Chicago wouldn't be the only city in ruins right now. I will say that Debbie definitely has the right to hate Cecil for wanting to use her 17-year-old son as a weapon against his father and for nearly sacrificing him to Hail Mary. But I've lost all sympathy for her because, again, she's putting blame on Cecil that she should be putting on Nolan. She's seen how much Nolan values life. She doesn't know his endgame yet, but she knows he'll kill anyone who gets in his way. He may even kill their son. Every bad thing that's happening right now is all Nolan's fault, yet Cecil is the one who gets all her hate. And keep in mind, she's always hated him because she's always known he would sacrifice her family for the greater good. But what is the greater good? The well-being of the entire fucking planet. Planet that's attacked practically every day. A planet where hundreds or even thousands of innocent people can die in a matter of seconds. Cecil has proven that he would never sacrifice her family for profit or even on a whim, but to save innocent lives. I think Debbie knows that, but she doesn't care. Her hatred is rooted into something far more selfish. She hates Cecil because 1, he bursts her little bubble of privilege, and 2, because he won't prioritize her family over every man, woman, and child on planet Earth. She sees Cecil as evil because he would choose the majority over her family. Even after he's exhausted all his other options, and even if he did his very best to keep her family safe while still prioritizing the majority. So Debbie's mentality can basically be summed up as, if Cecil doesn't care about my family first and foremost, then he doesn't care, period. Yeah, Debbie's hatred of Cecil does not make her heroic or even smart. It makes her an asshole. Nolan finally reveals his endgame, and Cecil comforts Debbie, apologizing for what she just heard.
They're going to kill each other, Cecil. You have to stop this.
What the fuck do you think he's been trying to do this entire time? So, according to the Invincible writer's track record, this is what makes a woman of color strong, being an entitled brat and making unreasonable demands of powerful men when they're put in impossible situations. As a side note, Duplicate will inevitably suffer from this in later seasons, but none of the white female characters like Shrinking Ray, Adam Eve, and Monster Girl will. Someone's desperate to be seen as progressive. The Invincible writers would have you believe that Debbie merely telling off powerful men, even when they don't deserve it, makes her strong. Yes, she conducts her own investigation and figures it out with Art's help. Yes, she epically cusses Nolan out. But when shit really hits the fan, she's deprived of true agency. If Debbie had half as much agency as the writers pretend, she would have demanded to go out there again and talk to Nolan. The planet could be enslaved. Her son could die. Any mother who loved her child wouldn't hesitate to put herself in danger. It may have gone something like this. They're going to kill each other, Cecil. You have to put me out there. I have to talk to Nolan again. Debbie, you could die. Cecil, my son could die, and you heard what Nolan said. You know what he wants to do to the whole planet. This is all or nothing. Nolan didn't kill me before. I may be able to do something. So Cecil orders his technicians to get the teleporter working faster since they need it for just one person. He also warns Debbie they may not be able to teleport her back, which she understands. Mark and Nolan stop in Chicago, and Nolan tells Mark that Debbie's life means nothing. She doubles over, both from the emotional pain and the realization that there is nothing she can do. If her life truly means nothing to Nolan, then Mark is just going to watch her die needlessly if she goes out there. She then looks up at Cecil, and for the first time, she finally understands the position he's in, constantly having to make terrible decisions in a world that's literally at war every single day. She then lays a hand on his arm in apology, and they exchange a look of tragic understanding. But of course, that doesn't happen. Instead, she demands that Cecil pull a miracle out of his ass while the two most powerful beings in the world fight to the death. Mark is nearly beaten to death, Debbie cries, and once again, Cecil doesn't hesitate to comfort her, which she does accept. In their last season 1 scene, Cecil is unusually awkward and apologetic as he explains that he faked Nolan's death to keep her and Mark's identity safe, and that his book royalties would go to them. He even sent proxies to Nolan's fake funeral so she and Mark's lives could go back to some kind of normal.
Normal?
Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean, like, what I meant was...
No. I'm sorry. This is all very kind. Thank you.
That might make you hopeful Debbie will improve, but her treatment of Cecil gets only more abhorrent in season 2. In season 2, Debbie, like Mark, is reeling from the trauma of Nolan's betrayal. She was nothing to her husband of 20 years, a fucking pet. Her trauma arc is actually very well done, and the writers did an excellent job of making me feel for her, from her drinking, to her collapsing in tears, to her mindless barefoot walk and near suicide attempt. Too bad it was poisoned by her worsening Karen attitude and her callousness to anyone who isn't her family. In episode 2, Mark notices that a kitchen cabinet door won't close properly.
It keeps doing that. I told Cecil those contractors he hired were total amateurs.
Really? You actually had the audacity to whine to Cecil about hiring amateur contractors when your house was immediately repaired? What about the victims of Chicago? Do you think their homes were immediately repaired? Do you think the GDA gave them first priority? Adam Eve's character arc answers that question, by the way.
You know what? Go stuff your coat up your ass. I live in that building, and if it was up to the bureaucrats, we'd be sleeping in high school gyms until Labor Day.
A lot of these people are probably still scraping the corpses of their loved ones off the pavements, and you're bitching about a cabinet? And it's just a cabinet. There's nothing wrong with plumbing or air conditioning or heat or running water, but Debbie still bitched to Cecil because of a kitchen cabinet door. How petty can you get? Mark, at least, seems to have more gratitude than his mother.
Yeah, well, at least he fixed her house.
His people shot it up.
To stop your psychopath husband, you spoiled whore, and they got brutally slaughtered for their efforts, which you saw. But they're GDA agents, so, they're not people. They're just bullet holes and bloodstains in the upholstery. Remind me again why I'm supposed to side with her? Oh, right, because she's a strong, assertive woman of color. Ironically, it's Mark who puts her in her place.
Can we please not do this right now?
Sorry. I guess we're both still a bit raw.
No, you've always been like this. It's just gotten worse. The scene continues with Mark refusing to go on a vacation with Debbie since he agreed to work for Cecil. Mark affirms that he's now an adult, which Debbie agrees with. Being an adult means making his own choices. He doesn't have to do everything Cecil tells him to do.
Yeah, Mom, I kinda do.
And he's absolutely right. He's the one who asked to work for Cecil. Cecil is his employer. When you get a job, you do what your employer tells you to do. You can ask for flexibility, but the employer has the final say, just as you have the final say if you decide to accept the job or not, which Mark did. But what Debbie is essentially telling her son is that as an adult, he can make his own choices by blowing off his employer whenever he wants because that employer happens to be Cecil. Cecil, who went above and beyond to accommodate and protect them after the terrible ordeal they endured at the end of season 1 when a lot of people had it so much worse. Even after everything, Debbie still has her home, her job, money, and her son. Even Adam Eve's parents have fallen on hard times. There was barely any food in their fridge while Debbie can blow as much money as she wants on her alcoholism, for God's sake. I'm beginning to realize something horrifying. Mark grows more entitled later in this season and beyond, but I think he started learning entitlement from Debbie long before Nolan revealed his true colors. Debbie then proceeds to assure her son that he doesn't have to prove himself. He's a good person, and no one thinks he's going to end up like his father.
But then why would you even say it?
Simple, because deep down, she knows it's not true. Mark was a victim of his father, but he was also involved in a battle that took a lot of lives, and unlike the audience, the world is not privy to Mark's perspective or the real story. But as we've seen, Debbie's favorite way of dealing with trauma is denial, which she's toxically projecting onto her son. Her second favorite way of dealing with hardship is taking it out on her punching bag, Cecil. Debbie goes to the Pentagon and Cecil greets her, remarking what a pleasant surprise it is to see her and how can he be of service, which honestly makes him sound like an abuse victim trying to appease his abuser. Debbie puts on her best Karen voice and berates Cecil for making Mark almost miss his high school graduation. He only gets one of those. He's barely 18. Cecil defends himself, saying truthfully that Mark asked to work for him. He's looking out for Mark, easing him back into the job.
It's not a job,
Yes, it is.
and he's not your soldier. You can't just order him around.
Yes, he fucking can. Mark is a legal adult and asked Cecil for the job. Debbie's behavior would only be justified if Cecil pressured Mark, which he didn't. Imagine if Mark enrolled in the army at 18 and then Debbie marched up to his drill sergeant and yelled everything at him that she yelled at Cecil. She would, rightfully, be condemned as an entitled parent who thinks her precious little boy is the exception to the rule. This is another privilege that Debbie exploits. Do you think Olga or Connie or Theo could march up to the director of the GDA and berate him the way Debbie constantly does? No, because their significant other was not the most powerful superhero on the planet. And they're not the parent of the current most powerful superhero on the planet.
Well, at least he follows orders.
Debbie gasps in horror, and Cecil backtracks, but it's too late. Debbie's got him pegged. He's only out for control, to make sure Mark isn't like his father. Could he even think that after everything Mark went through? And if Cecil decides he can't trust him, what then? Cecil tries to assure her that won't happen, that Mark's calling the shots, and Debbie calls BS. And she's right. Cecil is lying his ass off. He wants to control Mark. He wants to ensure that Mark is not like his father, and while Cecil hopes he can continue to trust Mark, it may not last forever. Oh, and yeah, he implanted a sonic bomb in Mark's head while he was recovering from nearly being beaten to death by his father. By all rights, I should be on Debbie's side, and I should be condemning Cecil as a lying, manipulative control freak, but I'm not. Remember, the fight between Mark and Nolan was monitored by the GDA. They saw and heard everything. How did Mark get Nolan to leave?
You, Dad. I still have you.
By declaring unconditional love for him. Now, if you condemn a dying boy for expressing unconditional love even to someone like Nolan, you have no heart. But if you expect Cecil to unconditionally trust that Mark won't join his father or go bad on his own, especially after the Guardian massacre in Chicago, you're insane. Not to mention, Mark showed signs of being like his father as early as episode 1 of season 2 when he asked Cecil to call on him again. Cecil refuses, knowing Mark is traumatized and unstable, and judging from his previous conversation with Amber, he wants to ease his own guilt rather than genuinely help people. That's not someone that can be out in the field right now when innocent lives are on the line. And when Cecil patiently tells him no and gives him good reasons as to why,
You can't stop me. I don't need your permission to be a superhero.
Mark's response is not just rebellious, it's petulant and entitled. Mark is clearly not a genocidal Nazi, but neither is Nolan. Even if you took the genocidal Nazi out of Nolan, you would still get an entitled psychopath who thinks that might makes right and throws his power around just because he can. If Mark acts entitled because Cecil rightfully and even gently told him no once, what could that lead to? And what would the consequences be? But if Cecil explained any of this to Debbie, would she understand? Of course not. She would just use Mark's trauma as an excuse for his behavior and condemn Cecil further. Cecil clearly doesn't enjoy lying to her, but she's proving herself to be a liability to her family and the planet. The only way Cecil could ever win with her is if he coddled Mark the way a mother would. In episode 4, Debbie has her barefoot walk and near suicide attempt. I loathe Theo, by the way. You should have known. Same with Debbie and Mark. Trauma is not an excuse for victim blaming and punishing a survivor of domestic violence. Fuck Theo. Debbie goes home, has a heart to heart with Art, and decides she wants to be independent of Nolan by donating his book money to the survivors of Chicago. Now, this would be an act of selfless compassion and strength, if it wasn't poisoned by her using it as an excuse to abuse Cecil once again. She calls Cecil over and informs him that she doesn't want Nolan's book money, Cecil's money, anymore, since the survivors of Chicago need it more than her. Cecil pleads with her to reconsider, but Debbie makes it clear that she's well aware of Cecil's ulterior motives. The only reason he's protesting so much is because the money makes both Mark and Debbie feel indebted to him, and Debbie's done with that bullshit. Okay, first and foremost, in what way, shape, or form is Nolan's book royalty money Cecil's money? Spoiler alert, it's not. When Cecil had Nolan's death faked to, first and foremost, keep Debbie and Mark's identity safe, Nolan's book sales automatically spiked with his death. Cecil had nothing to do with that. It's not Cecil's money. Debbie is gaslighting him. But I know why the writers did it this way. They wanted to make Debbie look strong and independent by seeing through Cecil's quote unquote shadiness. I think in the comics, Cecil manipulated the market to increase Nolan's book sales after his death was faked, but this isn't the comics, it's the show. With the removal of Cecil's involvement from the comics, they've made Debbie a gaslighting bitch. What's worse is that they've also made her more spoiled and hypocritical than ever. She's refusing Nolan's book money so she and Mark won't feel indebted to Cecil. Well, Debbie, if you don't want to feel indebted to Cecil, then stop using his medical facilities. You don't want to feel indebted to Cecil. You mean you don't feel indebted to him after his doctors saved your son's life twice in season 1? And after Angstrom Levy nearly ripped your arm off at the end of season 2, why didn't you demand to be sent to a regular hospital instead of a GDA hospital? So you'll feel indebted to Cecil by taking money that isn't even his, but you won't feel indebted to him by eating up his medical resources, which cost more than all of Nolan's book sales combined? And even after she says this, if her son ever got hurt again, do you think she would call a normal hospital? No, she would call Cecil and scream at him to get his ass in gear and help her son. If you have any experience with abusers, you'll know that they always have this entitled, you owe me attitude. And one of their favorite forms of abuse is gaslighting their victims into believing they're the entitled ones, even if they do something genuinely kind or helpful. But it seems this is now the writer's favorite way of making Debbie look strong, abusing Cecil, right after crying on his shoulder and mooching resources off him. Though to play devil's advocate, even if Cecil did mean to make Mark and Debbie feel like they owed him for doing this, I wouldn't blame him a bit after the way the two of them have been acting this season. When Oliver comes into the picture, I kind of admire Debbie for accepting him, but I think I would have admired her more if she washed her hands of him. An abused wife should never be expected to take care of her ex-husband's new child. Mark was the one who chose to take him, so he should be responsible, but it's Debbie who ends up raising him, with April's help, granted. The reason she gives to Cecil is that it's not about Nolan, but Mark. Oliver is his brother, which automatically makes him family to Debbie. Yeah, no, it doesn't. It really, really doesn't. Maybe if Debbie focused on her own healing and completely washed her hands of Nolan's problems, which Oliver is, she might become a better person. And, surprise, she doesn't become a better person. In episode 5, Mark returns from Thraxa and his entitled brattiness has gotten worse, downplaying that he went back on his word that he would obey Cecil's orders and pretending like everything would be fine on Earth when it wasn't. It never is. And this time the Guardians almost died again, which Mark expresses no concern about. In fact, he makes it all about him. What he did, what he found, was important, though it's clear he doesn't want to give Cecil the details. Yeah, Mark, Cecil is the bad guy for spying on you. You're not the bad guy for pussyfooting around the fact that the Viltrumites committed genocide on Thraxa, imprisoned your father, scheduled him for execution, ordered you to take over Earth, and will be checking on your progress soon. Cecil doesn't need to know the details on that stuff. So it's official. Mark can't be trusted. Cecil is absolutely right to be suspicious of him. He's proven that he'll go back on his word just because he can. He'll blow off protecting Earth whenever he wants. He doesn't care that the Guardians almost died, and he'll delay telling Cecil that the Viltrumites are expecting him to take over Earth because it'll make Mark look bad. This scene made me lose any condemnation I had for Cecil's so-called control freak attitude toward Mark and Debbie because they absolutely deserve it. They deserve to be monitored. They even deserve fucking cameras in their homes. And Oliver should be taken away from them. Yes, the GDA will test and train his powers when he gets them, but he'll also be raised with love and creativity if April and Helga are anything to go by. Because if Oliver doesn't develop empathy and control of his powers, say, if he's left alone with two selfish, ungrateful hypocrites who think they can do whatever they want just because they're them, the world will have another Omni-Man on their hands. I'll admit that Debbie got some seriously awesome moments with Angstrom Levy, but unfortunately I can't appreciate them as much as before for reasons I've already stated. Season 2 ends with Debbie severely injured and Cecil doting concern on her. Mark, to his credit, gives Cecil appreciation, and Cecil assures him that he'll always be there for them. In Season 3, we reach the climax of Debbie's Karen-ness, and she becomes irredeemable. Oliver gets his powers, Cecil finds out and offers to train him like he's been training Mark for the past 3 months with great results. Debbie, however, refuses. She can't trust Cecil after all. He's a control freak, and her priority is to her family. Then why the fuck are you letting him train Mark? Yeah, Mark's a legal adult, but if you mistrust Cecil so much, surely you would be protesting more on his behalf, and you're not. You have nothing to say about Cecil training Mark. And if your priority is to your family, what's your plan if Anissa comes back? You know, the Viltrumite who nearly crushed your son's throat under her foot? What's your plan when Mr. 10 times worse comes? What's your plan to protect Oliver from a Viltrumite invasion or another villain like Angstrom Levy? Be a Karen to them?
Cecil, I understand you have a job to do, but I also know that everything else is secondary to that job. And that's why I can never trust you with either Mark or Oliver's lives.
Yep, I was right. In Debbie's mind, if Cecil doesn't prioritize her family, then he's utterly without compassion or fairness. Seriously, just listen to the way she says it. Judging from her tone, you'd think Cecil's job was CEO of some power-hungry company that just eats up resources and gives nothing back. Kind of like Debbie. Cecil, in being consistent with his character, asked Debbie to think of all the people who aren't lucky enough to have children who can protect themselves like Mark and Oliver.
That is not fair.
No, Debbie, this is not fair. This is also not fair. Neither is this. Despite everything you and your family have endured, you have two superpowered children who have a far better chance of surviving than the average human, and the director of the GDA, the most powerful bureaucrat on the planet, is practically your manservant. But then again, this is how a lot of privileged people behave. They get angry and defensive when they're made aware that others aren't as fortunate as them. This is the second reason she hates Cecil so much. His very presence bursts her little bubble of privilege and reminds her that she lives on a planet that's in a constant state of warfare from both villains and alien invasions alike. A planet where an organization like the GDA, as flawed as it is a necessity. Cecil then gets a call. Not just any call, but a call alerting him that every superhero in America, save for Mark and Eve, have been kidnapped by Doc Seismic. And this is the look she gives him when he holds up a hand to her. That look is disgustingly classic Karen. You'd think he told her to shut the fuck up just because he held up a hand to take a call. But it really fits into Debbie's character. Cecil's priority wasn't talking to her, but doing his job, ergo he's the embodiment of evil. I'll avoid Debbie's opinion on the Mark-Cecil conflict since I need to go in depth for it, and that's for another video. So I'll skip to Debbie and Paul. This is where Debbie truly gets irredeemable. First, let me start by saying that Debbie is betraying her sons simply by dating. Bitch, you are the mother of Omni-Man's sons. You can't date anymore. I don't care how lonely and horny you are. Your children come first. You chose that when you chose to become a mother. You chose Mark and you chose Oliver. And Oliver is purple. She is risking their lives simply by dating. And then in episode 3, Debbie commits the ultimate betrayal by telling Paul that she was Omni-Man's wife and Mark and Oliver are his sons, without their consent. Debbie Grayson sold her sons because she felt queasy about lying to some nice guy she wanted to fuck. She sold her sons for sex. And she had the gall to tell Cecil that her responsibilities would be to her family first and that would never change. But remember, before she said that, Cecil was trying to get her to think about the upcoming Viltrumite invasion, how she and her children are a part of it whether she likes it or not. He was trying to get her to think outside her selfish little bubble. So she basically used her responsibility to her children to shut Cecil up, a responsibility that she obviously doesn't even feel. The absolute worst part is that the writers tried to cover it up by making Paul a genuine nice guy who can't be trusted, and for compromising Adam Eve's integrity by telling a betrayed Mark, who's he gonna tell? Have you heard of hidden cameras and microphones? Have you heard of social media? Debbie was a misogynist character right from the start, but now the writers aren't even putting in an iota of effort to keep up the pretense of empowerment. Debbie's character arc is going slow. Maybe we should give her a long distance friendship with Olga after Olga moved back to Russia. They could care about and support each other even if they're in different countries. Nah, that would actually be empowering to women. Debbie needs a man in her life, so we'll stick to the hideously misogynistic qualities of the comics and keep Paul. Oh, and Mark follows in his mother's footsteps in episode 7 when he too sells his own family out for sex by refusing to leave Adam Eve's side while the world is literally burning around him. It seems I was right again. Mark's greatest teacher for being an entitled, selfish asshole is not his father, but his mother, Debbie Grayson. Many have called Amber a Mary Sue, which is true, but Debbie is one as well. While she suffers plenty in the story, it's always from the consequences of other people's actions, not her own. Then again, how can she suffer from the consequences of being an abusive Karen when the writers don't even know what they've created? I'm sure you all noticed that Amber was greatly improved in season 2, but I think that was because there was a lot of negative feedback on her. I admit it took me a while to see what was wrong with Debbie due to all the good moments she had in the show, but I always felt like there was something off about her from the start, especially the way she treated Cecil. The problem is that the Invincible writers are not self aware. They didn't mean to make Amber and Debbie this way, but they have a warped idea of progressiveness. The entitled Karen is like an offshoot of the racist magic Negro trope. Instead of empowering women, it's just another aspect of misogyny. So, what would Debbie and Amber be like if they really were empowered characters? Well, you know what they say, write the books you want to read. So stay tuned for my next video where I write fanfic biographies for Debbie and Amber. I'll be including one for Cecil as well, since in my headcanon, his mother and the circumstances of his birth played a vital role in him becoming the person he is today. Thanks for watching. Please leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section and press that subscribe button.